that Americans understand how we benefit from diversity, and that we learn more about previous and current contributions of diverse groups in our society, because of the real threat to our nation is not diversity, but ignorance. And I'm sure that um, through your work in this class up to this point, you're probably right on board with what this quote is saying. When we talk about cultural pluralism, we're talking about the right that people have to preserve their cultural heritage. It encourages people to identify themselves in terms of their heritage as well as being American. And it's up to each individual how many of the customs, traditions, and language of an ethnic heritage they want to maintain. Cultural pluralism accepts diversity as a positive attribute of society, and it embraces an idea of appreciation versus tolerance for difference. Despite significant research and efforts, though, cultural pluralism continues to be overshadowed by this concept of Anglo-conformity. So when we talk about Anglo-conformity, we're talking about the idea that everyone should conform to the values, norms, and standards determined by the Anglo founders of our country. And these values are modified by a continuing white majority. So basically, Anglo-conformists reject differences because they are based on an assumption that a homogeneous society will be a harmonious society. And this involves the concept of an Americanization. So basically, they encourage immigrants to reject other language, culture, clothing, and traditions, and assimilate to becoming American as quickly as possible. Basically, Anglo-conformists force people of color to conform, but people of color could never get over the disadvantage of their skin color. So this involves a concept that we've talked about earlier this semester related to privilege. We also can consider ideas about diversity related to things like the melting pot, the stew, the salad. Basically, when we talk about a melting pot society, we're talking about the idea that ethnic differences could blend into a new, unique identity. But the reality is that the melting pot is highly selective, and it forces people to give up ethnic identification, history, traditions, and de-emphasizes differences. This approach disregards diversity and ignores differences to avoid potential problems that may arise from those differences. The stew and salad approach are simply other variations of the melting pot. You can find reference to these in your textbook, but what I'd like you to know about all of these different approaches is that they really kind of demean the individual cultural values and heritage of immigrants and those who are not Anglo. Related to that, and we talked about this earlier this semester as well, when we talk about the concept of being colorblind in reference to diversity, we're talking about people who say they ignore a person's skin color. So they might say, when I look at you, I don't see color, I just see you as my friend. These people deny that privilege exists and also deny the importance of culture. Finally, when we talk about separatism, we're talking about a belief that differences are irreconcilable and will ultimately result in hostility. So while separatists actually acknowledge ethnic and cultural differences, they think that these differences will actually result in conflict, and so they prefer a separatist society where cultures actually don't intermingle and those differences are kept separate. 10 things to know about race. Number 1, race is a modern idea. We know that ancient societies, like the Greeks, did not divide people according to their physical differences, but actually according to religion, status, class, or even language. The English word race turns up for the first time in the early 1500s in a poem in 1508 by William Dunbar, which referred to a line of kings. Number 2, race has no genetic basis. Not one characteristic, trait, or even gene distinguishes all the members of one so-called race from all of the members of another so-called race. Number 3. Unlike many animals, modern humans simply haven't been around enough, nor have populations been isolated enough to evolve into separate subspecies or races. So human subspecies don't exist. On average, only 1 of every 1,000 of the nucleotides that make up our DNA differ one human from another. We are one of the most genetically similar of all species on Earth. Skin color is really only skin deep. Number 4. Actually, the genes for skin color have nothing to do with genes for hair form, eye shape, blood type, musical talent, athletic ability, or any form of intelligence. Knowing someone's skin color doesn't necessarily tell you anything else about them at all. Number 5. Most variation is within, not between, races. Of the small amount of total human variation, 85% exists with any local population. About 94% can be found within any continent. This means, for example, that 2 random Koreans may be as genetically different as a Korean and an Italian. Number 6. Slavery predates race. Throughout much of human history, societies have enslaved others, often as a result of conquest or debt, but not because of physical characteristics or a belief in natural inferiority. Due to a unique set of historical circumstances, North America has the first slave system where all slaves share a common appearance and ancestry. Number 7. Race and freedom were born together. Actually, the U.S. was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, but the country's early economy was based largely on slavery. The new idea of race helped explain why some people could be denied the rights and freedoms that others took for granted. Number 8. Race justified social inequalities as natural. The common sense belief in white superiority justified anti-democratic action and policies like slavery, the extermination of American Indians, the exclusion of Asian immigrants, the taking of Mexican lands, and the institutionalization of racial practices within American government, laws, and society. Number 9. Race isn't biological, but racism is still real. Race is a powerful social idea that gives people different access to opportunities and resources. The government and social institutions of the United States have created advantages that disproportionately channel wealth, power, and resources to white people. Number 10. Colorblindness will not end racism. Pretending race doesn't exist is not the same as creating equality. When we talk about cultural pluralism, we're talking about encouraging people to identify themselves in terms of their heritage as well as their Americanness. It's really up to individuals how many of the customs, beliefs, traditions, and language of their particular heritage that they wish to maintain. 5 reasons to support pluralism involve the failure of Anglo-conformity. As I talked about before, Anglo-conformity can never succeed in our society because it fails to acknowledge the concept of privilege and disadvantage. Pluralism supports individual self-consciousness and self-determination. It embraces the necessity of human interdependence, and it recognizes diversity as an ideal. It also acknowledges the current existence of diversity and works to preserve as well as enhance our current society's views on diversity. Here's a quote: "Diversity alone is not pluralism. Pluralism is not a given, but must be created. Pluralism requires participation and attunement to the lives and energy of one another. This is a matrix. It's called the matrix for oppressive and anti-oppressive behaviors. I'd like you to pay close attention to it because it's really important when we're talking about what it really means to be a cultural pluralist. If you look, the first square where you see the word bigot, these are people that actively are oppressive. So they actively assert and promote prejudices. The second square are people who are prejudiced without expressing those ideas or behaving in ways that obviously reflect prejudice. So this would be the second square where we're talking about being passive and oppressive, or a conformist. Number 3 square is reject prejudiced ideas, sympathize with victims of social injustice, but do not express their views. They say and do nothing to make a difference. So this would be a passive, anti-oppressive person, and this is actually the square that has a line drawn through it. Finally, the 4th square, that would be active and anti-oppressive, and that's where you see the word pluralist. People must reject prejudiced ideas, articulate pluralist attitudes, and act on a new consciousness of human differences. So, what this means is, it is not possible to claim to have pluralistic attitudes and be passive, because passivity perpetuates social injustice. What this means is, if you see something wrong, if you see someone engaging in prejudice, if you see someone engaging in discrimination, if you see someone who's not acknowledging their privilege to the detriment of another person, and you know it's wrong and you just stand by, you cannot consider yourself a pluralist, because if you're passive and not active, you are perpetuating social injustice.